Are y'all ready for a little history lesson?
Oh my!
What's up, YouTube? So today's history lesson is about the leatherback morph and bearded dragons. So before we can talk about the history of the leatherback morph, let's talk about what a leatherback actually is. Now, I've gotten these questions several times here recently. I'm not sure why. There must be something going around in the air where people are now asking these questions. What is an American leatherback? What is an Italian leatherback? What are they? We're going to get into them. But before we can do that, let's talk about what a leatherback is overall. A leatherback is an incomplete dominant trait that when you are breeding them together, you get a silky or a silkback. So an incomplete dominant trait is the same thing as a heterozygous for whatever the trait is. So whenever you talk about in terms of genetics, a leatherback essentially is a het silky or a het silkback, meaning they carry the trait for silky. And because they carry the trait and then it's incomplete dominant, they actually display that trait in the form of a leatherback. So when you breed them together, you get a super leatherback or a silky, and that's where you get no scales whatsoever. So it's really a morph that is technically a mutation of the scales. So that's what you do. That's what you get when you breed two leatherbacks. You get a silky because the mutation of the scales essentially times 2. So now there's no scales. So that's essentially what a leatherback is, what a silky is. And before I can continue with that is, silkies are the most unethical thing you can find in bearded dragons. So if you are looking for a bearded dragon, just stay away from silkies. They can have a normal life if you take care of them the way they're supposed to be taken care of, but they have so many health issues and so many requirements to have a good life that it's not an ideal dragon for anyone, especially not even a beginner. So silkies are a big no-no in the bearded dragon community, and actually most retailers as well as most classifieds won't let you sell silkies. Now, obviously, you can find silkies at pet stores because they don't really care. They get them wholesale, and these wholesalers don't care because they're just trying to make money. So just be careful when you are looking for a bearded dragon to stay away from silkies. Now, let's talk about what the different things are. So there's 3 different types of leatherbacks. There's American leatherbacks, there's Italian leatherbacks, and there's recessive leatherbacks, also known as phantom leatherback, depending on who you ask. So recessive leatherback, that's exactly what it is. A recessive leatherback is the only leatherback morph that does not have a super version because the super version essentially is the leatherback. So 2 het recessive leatherbacks or 2 heterozygous phantom leatherbacks will not show you any morph of leatherback. So they'll have normal scales, but they carry the leatherback morph. They just don't show the leatherback morph because it's a recessive leatherback. So in order for you to get a phantom leatherback or a recessive leather, you actually have to breed 2 het recessive leathers or 2 het phantom leathers together to get a leatherback out of that clutch. So unlike recessive leather, Italian leather and American leather don't have that workaround. Essentially, there's not as much, you don't have to do as much to get to it. As long as you have one parent that is a leatherback, you can get offsprings that are leatherbacks. Versus the recessive leather, if you have one parent that is a recessive leatherback and the other one is not het for that recessive, you won't get any babies that are going to show that trait. Now, there's one more thing on top of all that, and that's micro scale or micro leatherbacks. These are leatherbacks like American or Italian leatherbacks, also on top of the recessive leatherback. So it's 2 doses essentially of leatherback on top, and that's the best way to get the nearest to silky as you can get without having all the health problems that silkies have. So a recessive leatherback with American leatherback or Italian leatherback on top is how you get a micro leatherback. And again, they don't have any of those health issues that a silky has. So it's the closest thing to a silky without getting the silky, essentially. But it's a lot of work, and most people don't even work with recessive leatherback. So it's something people are unaware of what it actually is. And when they see it, they ask questions about it. And that's essentially what some of the questions have been is, what's American leatherback? What's Italian leatherback? How do I get a recessive leatherback? So people are asking good questions, but I don't know if people actually need to ask these questions, because if you are looking to get into recessive leatherback, it's a very niche thing, and most people don't even have recessive leatherback, and the only people that sell recessive leatherbacks are people that have leatherbacks from phantom dragons, and phantom dragons is the only people that actually regularly sell het recessive leatherback or visual recessive leatherbacks. So if you are looking for one, if you want to get into that project, it's a lot of work, maybe go check out phantom dragons. So Italian leatherback and American leatherback. Now we're on to the incomplete dominant ones. Italian leatherback and American leatherback are essentially the same thing. They're compatible. However, the American leatherback has more scales than the Italian leatherback. So that means they're a little bit more scaly, but not as scaled as a normal bearded dragon. The Italian leatherback, on the other hand, is almost no scales. It's super smooth down the back. There's down the spine, there's a couple nudges or bumps of scales, if you want to call it that. I don't know why I said nudges. But there's a couple bumps down the spine of that Italian leatherback, and then down the sides of the bearded dragon, you will also see scales just like a regular bearded dragon. Now, towards the hind legs of that bearded dragon, the scales will start to disappear because that's what happens in Italian leatherback. Versus American leatherback still has most of the scales down the sides, just like a regular bearded dragon. Now, American leatherback and Italian leatherback, why are people not using these terms anymore? The reason people aren't using these terms anymore is because when American leatherbacks and Italian leatherbacks were being called what they were, which was way before my time, but whenever I started breeding bearded dragons in 2013, they were still around. People were still calling them American leatherbacks and Italian leatherbacks. The problem was people were breeding for silkies. And the only way you can get a silkie is by breeding leather to leather. And people weren't using the same line of leather. They weren't using 2 Italian leatherbacks or 2 American leatherbacks to get the silkie. They were using Italian leatherbacks and American leatherbacks and breeding them together. And eventually what we have now is dragons that have no lineage whatsoever. You can't trace them back to just Italian leatherbacks. You can't trace them back to just American leatherbacks. And therefore the American leatherback and the Italian leatherback is no more, and we just have regular leatherback. So the only difference really is the lineage and the way they appear in terms of how scaly they are. So why is that a problem, you may ask? Is because it's important to keep things in track of the lineage. So if you know where the lineage is, if you know where it came from, you can make decisions later on what to do with that dragon if you decide to breed it. And if you don't know that information, then I don't think you should be breeding that dragon. Now, obviously with leatherbacks, since it happened so long ago in terms of people, breeding them together and creating silkies, and now there's no split between American leathers and Italian leathers, it doesn't really matter at this point, because if you breed, you're going to get a leatherback, regardless of if it's Italian leatherback or American leatherback on one side of the pairings. So with that said, hopefully that explained a little bit to the people that have the question of what is an American leatherback, Italian leatherback, recessive leatherback, and how do you get a micro leather. So if that's going to answer all the questions there, then I guess that's it. So if you made it this far into the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything that I put out in the future. As always, peace.